All right, time to begin. We're all here. Clock. Will please bow with me and have a word of prayer. Our holy God, hallowed is your wonderful and mighty name. Your name is above every name. You are the only true and living God, creator of heaven and earth. All men will bow before you, and we confess your name now and look forward to the day when we can confess you in your presence. We thank you, Father, for our world, as troubled and as broken as it is, and with the evil that seems to rage in some places tonight. We pray that you will look upon the people who are suffering. We pray especially that you will look upon your children in these areas that likewise have lost their homes and that are refugees looking for peace. Father, give us peace. We pray that as we read your word tonight that we will see that those who have stood for your truth have always suffered the affliction and the opposition from the world. Help us not to be afraid or not to be surprised, but to recognize that your truth will transcend above everything that we know and that we experience in this world. Help us to focus our heart and our faith upon your word and upon your promise. Through Christ we pray. Amen. We are in Acts chapter 23. Sunday morning we were studying where Paul at the Temple Mount was trying to make a defense for the charges that he had blasphemed by taking a Gentile into the temple. When they saw him there, they had earlier seen Paul with Trophimus from Ephesus, and they just supposed that Paul had broken the law. He had not. But they had gone to the extreme, as so many of them go 0 to 100 in just a half a second in their emotions. And they started beating on Paul to try to get the truth about what these people were accusing Paul of, which to me, as we mentioned, is so absurd, and it's just, there's really an absurdity to the scene. And the tribune, the Chiliarch, the man in charge, finally steps in and says, all right, everybody, be quiet. Come down the steps, out where everybody is, settle down. We're going to let Paul speak for himself. And the 23rd chapter begins with Paul's defense to these people of the riot and the mob. Verse 1 of Acts 23. And looking intently at the council, I love that first phrase, that if you want to get people's attention or you are concerned about getting a message across, a parent who has to talk to their child about something very important and wants to get their attention and wants to keep their attention, you look intently. This is not some casual, trivial conversation. When he looks intently, he's making sure he has everybody's attention. And that's not too hard given the situation that's right here. But something more than that. He is not looking at them defensively. He is looking at them offensively. He has something to say that they need to hear. And they're not in a mind to have people talk to them the way this man is about to talk to them. They've never had anybody like this. Paul is something new to them, as they will discover. And he looks intently at them, has their attention, and he says, brothers. First word. I'm not an alien. I'm not an enemy. I'm a Jew. I'm one of you. As he had previously would say, you know who I am. Brothers, he said, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. Now I'm going to come back to that here in just about 30 seconds. Verse 2, the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Now, whether or not they actually struck him or not, the scholars are divided on that, and it really doesn't matter. The fact that this high priest, Ananias, whether he was in his robes or not, whether he was incognito on this regular day, may or may not be the case. There's all kinds of arguments that are going back and forth that you can read about as to how this situation is going to play out when Paul will say, I didn't know he was a high priest. He was not lying. He just didn't recognize him. He hasn't been in Jerusalem for years. And so when the high priest said, smack that man in the mouth, not the face, not the head, it's the mouth. He doesn't like what he just heard from Paul's mouth. Now let's come back to what he said here in verse 1. He said, brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. Now, think about that for a moment. The message that is between the lines, or maybe even right on top of the lines with this statement. Why would this statement incite such rage within the high priest and those others? What was this statement, or what about the statement, or what were the words within the statement that caused them to snap like that and say, strike him in the mouth right now? What do you think it was? Think about that for a moment. Yes, sir, Mike. All right, Mike says when Paul said brothers, he's making them his equal, and the high priest would not like that. That's exactly right. What else? Yes, John? John says everything that Paul had been preaching up to that point had been true. He wasn't bending the truth. That's right. And he's not apologizing. You know, when a man who is in charge and who is used to being in charge and who is the head honcho and he calls somebody on the carpet, we don't want to see any kind of offensive resistance. We want to see humble apology. And adding on top of that, to add insult to the injury here, Paul is not appealing to the mercy of the high priest. He appeals to his good conscience. I haven't done anything wrong. And the authority that he appeals to is who? God. That's right. This is before God. This is over your head. What colonel or general likes someone to go over their head? He has gone way over their head. He said, I'll stand before God. He knows that I have done everything in good conscience, which immediately throws a dark shadow on the charge that these people are making, that he is very subtly pitting them against God. Ed? Well, he certainly does that, yes. Let me surmise that. Ed is saying that because the Romans are there, the high priest may not feel like, I would say, that they're completely in charge. The Romans are the ones who are running this meeting, and Paul is making this appeal not to the high priest in a private interview, but this is publicly before all of them. And so the high priest is really coming to open shame in front of their very own enemies. Is that right, Ed? Okay. Right. That's a good point.
It's a very important thing to hear that as Theophilus is hearing that. Let me put that in a couple ways. When you are persecuting Christians, right, you're doing it with all good conscience.
Right.
And when you are persecuting Christians, not need to hear that and figure out, well, maybe you're wrong. And people who are Christians can hear it with all good conscience and be completely misunderstood. So there's a lot about the way that Paul, or the Holy Spirit through Paul, starts this conversation that grabs the initiative in a way that goes before God, and it says a lot of things that are not to us unless counterintuitive.
Ed is saying basically that even when Paul was Saul of Tarsus and he was against the law, he was still doing it in good conscience, which is a good lesson for us, for people in the world who may have a clear conscience, but they are working against God. They need time for that. Now, Nick, I'm sorry. I thought you were telling me I have 5 minutes. But he's raising his hand. All right, Nick. Yeah, that had me worried there for a minute. Okay, yes, sir. Yes. Right. Right. Nick is making the point that even when we today try to do everything that is right according to the Bible, the world will not see that or take that lightly. They take that as an insult, that you're judging me because I'm not doing this or that. Yeah, they'll have another term for that that's often used, holier than thou. Oh, yeah, you think you're, yeah, and that has been an unfortunate phenomena since the beginning, it seems. That's exactly right. All right, I lost my regular glasses, and I've got these ugly old readers here, so I apologize for you at home who are looking at this. Okay, then Paul said in verse 3, he said, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law? And yet, contrary to the law, you order me to be struck. And that's right, he didn't have the power to do that. But then he said, God will strike you. It's like, you hit him. No. God's going to strike you. And the play here, in the Greek, the first word is smite, which is always, the first word in a sentence is always the most important. And he said, smite God to you. And he said, you whitewashed wall. Now, that immediately conjures up, you remember the conversation that Jesus had with the high priest and Pharisees, calling them whited sepulchres, which basically meant it was just a tomb full of dead men's bones that was rotten, decaying inside, but on the outside it was clean and white and nice. Whitewashed wall here, you got an ugly old wall that's trying to stand up, and you just paint over it and paint over it. Like you have an old shed or a shack out back, a tool shed. You just put a coat of paint on it looks really fine. But it's not going to last. It's going to fall apart. Well, put another coat of paint on. Maybe it'll last another 5 years. You know, the absurdity of that. This is what Paul is saying. You whitewashed walls. They have stood for so long, but they're coming down. And as soon as he says that, he is immediately corrected. Verse 4, those who stood by. Would you revile God's high priest? And to Paul's credit, whatever people may say or whatever you may read about it or whatever commentary is made by scholars about Paul, good or bad, to Paul's credit and his defense, he says, I didn't know, brothers, that he was the high priest. For it is written, and he'll appeal back to Exodus 22, for you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. He recognized that law, and he is saying, in essence, I would keep that law, and I would not have done this or said that if I knew he was the high priest. But that doesn't change the facts of what this high priest has done, because what he said to do was also contrary to law. Something about Paul. Wouldn't you love to be there? This is definitely a side note here. We'll get off of it really fast. But one of the things all my life I've loved to do is look at Matthew Brady photos of the Civil War. Open those up and look at them. And what I always do is you look at the face of those young boys, and as I pick one out and look at him, I wonder what kind of guy he was. I wonder if I would like him. Or if I wonder if he would be a likable person, or if he would be a problem. Or would he be somebody that I would feel close to or not? Because you look at the face of a person in a flat, one-dimensional photograph, it doesn't tell you really anything about that person, unless there are scars all over him and he's wearing a prison suit. But something of that nature that you think, okay, I think of Paul. What was it about Paul's presence? What was it about John the Baptist? John the Baptist, he was never in a room. I say he'd walk into a room. He would just walk into a field, and he had everybody's attention. And I think Paul, in a similar fashion, something about his personality, his presence, persona, whatever it is, it immediately got people's attention, and they would fall one way or the other, good or bad here. Yeah, very quick. And just as he kept the vow, Paul is saying that Paul still had respect for these people. Though the system was going down, when he said, God will smite you, that's a prophecy. It's not just a retort. You hit me, well, God will hit you. He is telling that this system is on its last leg. And as Ed had mentioned, it's just going to be 3 or 4 years and it's gone. And so here is the situation that Paul finds himself in. But we need to hasten. Oh, go ahead, Ed. Yeah, Luke is just simply reporting this. That's right. He's just reporting so everybody will have the facts. So after he says that, here then in verse 6, when Paul perceived, now here's the brilliance of Paul, when he saw that this is going to get out of hand here. How am I going to get out of this? Because the Romans aren't going to deliver, because this is a matter of Jewish law. The Romans are just standing back figuring out, why are these guys hate each other so bad and want to kill each other? Because something like this happened just a few years back. And we haven't heard the last of him, this rebel called Christus, Jesus. And so they're still dealing with that. And so when Paul sees the situation in verse 6, that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, brothers, I'm a Pharisee. Now he started out with brothers, but now I'll tell you which clan I'm from. I'm a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees, both his mother and father. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. He immediately turns the subject to resurrection, knowing that the Pharisees were full believers in that and the Sadducees were not. So as he turns the subject to resurrection, notice what happens here in verse 7. Luke says, and when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Now, just a few moments ago, they were all together, kill him, kill him, kill him. When people have a common enemy, they will unite. But when there is no common enemy, but it is just simply a threat to one party, but not the other, now the unity is gone here. And here we see that they divided in verse 7. Verse 8, now Luke will explain this for Theophilus' benefit. Like so often in the book of Mark, In Matthew, there are no explanations about Jewish ceremonies or sacrifices, because Matthew was written to Jews. They knew full well what it was. But in Mark, Mark will stop and he will explain certain ceremonies, holy days, and sacrifices, because the reader of the Gospel of Mark was Roman. And they didn't know anything about the Jewish traditions, etc., very much. Same way here. Luke will stop and explain to Theophilus, whether he was Roman or not, I'll let you decide for yourself. But he says in verse 8, "For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all." So that's quite a divide in their philosophy with each other. Verse 9, "Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply." I find this amazing. Quote, "We find nothing wrong in this man." I can just see how noble they looked. "We find nothing wrong with this man." What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? They turned on a dime, just like that. And it would be interesting to know if we're ever able to ask Paul in the eternity, how did you feel then when that happened? It may not be important once we're in heaven, but right now it's just kind of a curiosity. I wonder what Paul was thinking. Yeah, you guys wanted to kill me a few moments ago. Now we're buddies. Now we're all on our side. So they said, well, what if that happened? It's not that big a deal. And so verse 10 said, when the dissension became violent. Now this is more than just a difference of opinion now. The tribune, true to form, he said, these guys, you can't leave them alone for a moment. They're constantly fighting and threatening each other. So the tribune, after afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down. So we showed earlier in a picture, remember a week or so ago, the steps that were going up to the barracks. The soldiers were up there. Paul had evidently come down to speak to these people. And when it just got out of hand, the chiliarch or the tribune said, guys, go down there and get him and save him. Pull him out of that crowd here, because they're going to tear him apart. And so they took him by force and brought him into the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood by him and said, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. That's why Paul had to go to Jerusalem. The events of what we have just read was Paul's testimony to Jerusalem about the Christ. And that's why he was saved and said, now you're going to have some trouble doing this. They're going to bind you and they'll beat you. But you will have a stage. You will have an audience to testify to the Son of God, to all the people, including the Sanhedrin, the high priest, all of these officials, all of these, plus the Roman soldiers, plus the tribune. They will all know who I am. And when the Lord comes to him, he in essence is telling Paul, job well done. Now we're going to move on to Rome. And so I have to think that night Paul is feeling, yeah, all right. We knocked that one out. Now let's go on and knock the next one out. Here we are. The Lord is going to find me on my way to Rome, and I'm going to make it. Brent? Right. Yeah, let me filter what you just said here for those who are listening and those who couldn't hear. But it's exactly right. It's as if now the party of the Pharisees have received a little credibility from Paul about the resurrection. And I think you're right, Brent, that this is going to open the door for their conversion down the line. The Sadducees don't want any part of it. And however that works out, and the Sadducees were, and when you study their history, were a very political party. They were not spiritually minded at all. The bottom line for them was the dollar or the shekel. And so as this is going on, he divides them, finds an audience that will hear, and has made this testimony that no doubt that long after Paul is gone, they're really going to keep going at it. And how this will evolve, maybe Philip, I don't know. The text doesn't say. Maybe Philip from Caesarea comes up and he fills in and finishes for Paul because they want to know more about it. Because Caesarea is just a short ways down to the coast. And so there are many men there that can preach the gospel and testify to Christ. But Paul's the one who was the lightning rod that brought this all together and crystallized it in the minds of these people. And now he will be on his way to Caesarea. Yes, Grant? Yes. Correct. That's right. Let me repeat it for the people. Grant is basically saying this is appealing kind of to the party spirit. When we might not accept a person initially with what they're saying or doing, then we find out they are from our hometown, or they are from our neck of the woods, or they're one of us. Then we will defer to them, and then we'll accept them in open arms. But there is that party spirit. You're either with us or against us. And Paul made a shrewd move right here. Yes, Terry? Yep. Yes. Yeah. Right. That's right. 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 Terry is making the point that had these people been objective, Paul's witness, they would have understood him initially. But because they were not objective and did not take his testimony seriously, but were already prejudiced. Now, this is my word, not Terry's, but the idea, they were prejudiced by their own feelings. They could not be objective, and that's exactly right. The same thing plagues us today. Our prejudices blind us from being objective from what one may say or do as being the truth. And had they seen that, they would have long earlier been on Paul's side. But there's something about this that's just a little, it makes me think, I'm not so sure about them. The moment he speaks of one of their hobbies, one of the issues of resurrection that they're all about, then they turn and they're his ally, his helper. But They were not objective. They needed more help. But Paul he opened the door. He testified to them, and it wasn't easy. Now, in verse 12, it says, when it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath, neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now, he's in the barracks, and he's thinking, okay, the Lord has come to me, and he says, I'm going to go to Rome. That's great. That's wonderful. But unbeknownst to Paul, as his nephew will find out later, here in just a few moments, these men will make an oath. Now, I don't want to sit in judgment of scholars. I'm not a scholar. But it seems to me that the modern translations, including the English Standard, the New King James, the King James, and all they use the word oath. And in the Greek, that's not that word. It's the word curse. They brought a curse upon themselves. Let me read it to you literally from the Greek text. It says, and a conspiracy to the Jews cursed themselves, saying neither to eat nor to drink until they should kill Paul. Now, an oath is, I solemnly promise. That's an oath. This was not an oath. Okay, we're going to promise we're going to get Paul. No, it was calling a curse down upon them. They cursed themselves to say, we're going to kill him. And may God kill us if we don't do this. This is calling a curse upon themselves. And this is not the first time it will be said in this context. So the reason I point this out is that this is not just your average conspiracy. Hey guys, let's get rid of this guy here. No, it's not that. They are so profoundly filled with hatred towards Paul that they are calling themselves to be accursed if they can't kill him by that next day. This is hatred in the extreme, in the far extreme. And this is an ugly side of humanity. Verse 13, there were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, we have strictly bound ourselves by a curse, not an oath. We have strictly bound ourselves with a curse to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now, this is an evil that we are seeing that has played itself out against Paul in many places, but this is kind of coming to a crescendo. Now, let me stop here for a moment and make an observation because I think it's certainly relevant for where we are right now. Very often, with evil, there is a profound irony. And by that I mean this. Evil, as in this case, will want to present itself as noble. We have a noble cause. We're going to kill these people. Go to the Third Reich. They had a noble cause. This was God's will. In I can say so much about the Crusades that were not holy at all. But in those Crusades, they were all prompted by, quote, it's God's will. And when a soldier heard that, they were ready to go kill everyone they saw who was an opponent of Christianity. And it was all done under the guise of something that is noble. And if you look for it, it's not hard to find, even this hour. Evil in the world, on whatever scale, very often will appeal to a noble cause, hoping that people will sign on and join them. Evil is not noble. And if you don't know what noble is, then we need to reassess. True nobility, true righteousness, true goodness walks in the form of a child of God. And it may not always appear to people. I'll stop preaching here now because, boy, I could really go on this one. But this is the world that we live in. And that's the world that Paul lived in. And as we see this here, these men who are supposed to be the rulers of God's chosen people, the leaders of holiness, waiting for the Messiah, are just binding themselves with a murderous curse by their own doing. No one has prompted this. And the fact that these chief priests and elders would say, good job, guys, what can we do to help? That's what they're going to do here in the little time that we have left here. Now, verse 15. Now, therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near. That's the plan. Go tell the tribune that, we would like to talk with Paul a little bit more. Send him back out of the barracks, out of safety. Send him back out here to us, out here on the court, and we'll take care of him. Verse 16 says, now the son of Paul's sister, this is one of the few references to Paul's immediate family. Obviously, he has a sister who has a son. So here's Paul's nephew. Heard of their ambush. So he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. The amazing thing about this is that he has the freedom as a young man, however old he is. What courage, what strength of faith and character, integrity this young boy has. And he knows that his uncle is going to be ambushed. And he is able to go in the barracks, and they give him permission. Whatever it was about his persona, his presentation, whatever he said, they're able to let him go see Paul. And he entered the barracks and told Paul. And verse 17 says, and Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him. Go tell the big man. Go tell the top colonel. So verse 18, they took him and brought him to the tribune and said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you. And to the tribune's credit, I think this guy, we'll find out later, his name is Claudius Lysias. But to his credit, he has got enough integrity about him that he's not going to fall into the trap of these Jews fighting each other. He really wants the truth. And here's a young man says, I have something to tell you. And he's going to listen to him. He, going aside, asked him privately, what is it that you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by a curse. There's the word again, not oath. Who have bound themselves with a curse, neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent. This is happening in real time here, right now. So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, tell no one that you have informed me of these things. Don't tell anybody. I'm sure he will. So he went out. The providence of God is all over this story. All over it. Verse 23, then he called two of the centurions and said, get ready 200 men. We got two centurions, each under 100 men. Get 200 men with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the third hour of the night. Okay, this is going to be in the middle of the night, and provide mounts for Paul. This is interesting. And get him a car too. get him a horse to ride on. For Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. Felix is down in Caesarea at the palace there, Caesarea Maritima. I'll show you pictures of it Sunday morning. And he says, your job, men, is to get Paul safely to Caesarea. And these 40 men who have vowed themselves with a curse to kill Paul before they ever eat or drink again, you should be able to handle this. But he doesn't tell them about the curse. He doesn't tell them about the ambush. He just simply says, now, we got to get these guys safe down here. Now, what all he may have said and told these men, we don't know. The text doesn't tell us about all these things. He just says, get these men ready, and we're going to leave in the middle of the night, and I want him safely to Felix. Now, what he's doing is now, he realizes he's got a hot potato here with Paul. He's not made a decision or judgment one way or the other, but he recognizes Paul is, as we have said, he's a lightning rod for a major, major revolution here and problem within Judea. And so now His superior is Felix. And he said, I want to get him to Felix so that this man, Claudius Lysias, he can back and say, I've done my job. Now, I've done what I'm supposed to do. Now I'm handing him over to you, Felix. You're the one who's going to take care of him. And so that's what he does. And verse 25, he wrote a letter to this effect. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him. There's a little pat on the back for himself. Having learned that he was a Roman citizen. Yes, I've been very, oh yes, oh how noble. Verse 28, and desiring to know the charge for which he was accusing him, I brought him down to the council, to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. On the next day, they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. And when they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. Here's the letter. Here's Paul the prisoner. And on reading the letter, he asked what province he was from, and he learned that he was from Cilicia. You remember Antioch up there north in Cilicia? And he said, I'll give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's Praetorium. I'll show you a picture of Herod's Praetorium Sunday morning, where he, in all likelihood, where he stayed for 2 years. But one of the things that just catches my fancy about this is that as this has happened, and he's followed military protocol and gotten Paul safely to Felix, he said, then once he's there, we're going to tell the Jews when they're showing up today, where is Paul? Oh, he's not here. I wonder about those 40 men that took that curse. Oh, he's down in Caesarea with Felix. Okay. Oh man, this is going to be a long time before we eat. And so that's going to set this scene up here in chapter 24 that is so wonderful. We have 1 minute left. Any comment or question about this wonderful scene in Caesarea that is going to unfold here? Well, read it ahead this week, and Sunday morning we'll look at this in detail. Thank you.